Good evening, everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, back with you for another episode of the BGC Book Club. So please come on in the room, as I like to always say, and get ready for a great conversation with an author that we hope that you're familiar with. And if not, after tonight, you will be and ready to tap into many of the great books that she has out there in the world. So I am coming to you from outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, with a whole bunch of other places that I've lived in between. So if you don't mind shouting out where you're joining us from, if it's your first time, if you're here every week, whatever the case may be, just so we can have a good idea of who all is in the room. So if you love romance, contemporary romance stories, you're going to love what we're going to be talking about this evening. Now, our special guest is Beverley Kendall, who has published probably about a few dozen, actually, books that are both contemporary and historical novels in the romance category. She writes full-time and has a bunch of other things going on in her life, including a blog called Smitten by Books and just so many other wonderful things. But tonight, we're excited to have her here to talk about the second book in her series, Token, and this one is One in a Million. Yes, like the Aaliyah song, One in a Million. And if you saw the post on social media, that was the song that I used to talk about this upcoming show. So without any further delay, let's welcome Beverley Kendall to BGC Book Club for the first time. Welcome, Beverley.
Hi, thank you, Marcy, so much for that welcome.
Yes, it's such a pleasure to have you here. So glad to have an opportunity to talk to you just about One in a Million and all of the wonderful things that you have been doing in the publishing industry. So how does it feel to have this particular book out in the world?
Relief. I'm really excited, getting a book to um getting a book released, at least to get to that point where it's on the shelves and you can order it. It is like the biggest relief because, first the story. I have been wanting to tell this story for probably over like a decade.
Wow.
But I had envisioned it completely different. I had a different title for it. It was different. And then when I realized that I could incorporate it into Whitney's story, that's when I was like, oh my God, I have to change some things, but I can do my surrogacy book kind
Yes.
of. And so I was so relieved that I then had a plot, a premise for her book. So I'm just happy to get her story out, relieved it's out, happy that that last read through is over and the proofs are gone and it's out.
Yes, yes. And I definitely enjoy reading the book. And, when we planned this, I wasn't even thinking about the fact, and we're going to get into the story. Y'all. I know it might seem like we're jumping ahead, everybody who's watching, but we're not, because you talked about the surrogacy story. But it's also interesting that this is Black Maternal Health Week.
Oh gosh, I didn't even know that.
Right, wasn't thinking about that when we planned this. So actually, this book is timely. This conversation is timely at this time. Just thinking about Black women and some of the things that they may encounter and choices and decisions they have to make when it comes to motherhood. So that it's right on time as far as that's concerned. So, as I mentioned at the top, that this is the second book in a series. So, and this, as you said, this is Whitney's story. The first book was Kennedy's story.
Yes.
So when you started the series, number one, well, first question, are there going to be more than just the two? And when you started, did you automatically know that there would be a Whitney story?
I knew that there was going to be a Whitney story as soon as, because there's three major friends group there.
Yeah.
And so I knew that there was going to be a Whitney story. I knew hers was going to be the next story. You know, there is an Aurora story. There's an Aurora story, so Aurora's been in these two books. I can't give you anything in terms of time or whatever that is. but yes, she certainly, her story, I had her story in mind when I was creating this friend group,
Okay.
these three friends.
Yes, and hers is definitely an interesting story. So for those who haven't had an opportunity to read One in a Million yet,
Mm.
it was just a little synopsis of what the book is actually about.
So the book is about Whitney, who is this major. Now, I have to tell you, I kind of fashioned her after Rihanna, right?
Okay,
I
okay,
had Rihanna in my head when I was writing Token with her, right, in
okay.
mind. And so it's about, she is this star. She's a superpower, right? She's got the singing, she's got the acting, and she's got this business, right? And she's got this designing. Like she is basically she has a clothing line, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
she teams up with this company, and her stuff is just because she's this very stylish woman,
Right.
and so she has all of these things, and she has something called endometriosis. That
Mhm.
is something that I have. This is how I know about it.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to, but it could make it difficult for her to get pregnant later on. The doctor will usually tell you, if you're going to have babies, have them early,
Right. Mhm,
because the longer you wait, because it's a scarring of the uterine line, right? It's a
mhm.
real, and it's painful. So she's told, if you're going to have them early. And she knows that she's got her whole career. So what
Yeah.
she decides to do when she finds out that this is, what she's been diagnosed with, she decides that just to be safe, she's going to freeze some of her eggs. So
Mhm.
she does it when she's young. She's in her mid-20s when she does it. And this is just going to be an in case, right? And then, of course, what happens? What happens is that the fertility clinic where she stored her eggs, it gets mixed up. Not going to tell you how, but
Nope.
there's there's a mix up, and her eggs are used with the hero of the book. His name is Miles.
Yes.
He's a married man, and him and his wife hired a surrogate because his wife has issues getting pregnant, and issues with her uh, getting pregnant and staying pregnant. So they decide to hire a surrogate to have a child for them. And what ends up happening is Whitney's, which is also her stage name is Sahara. Whitney's eggs get fertilized with his sperm, and
Mm.
the surrogate has her baby and his baby. And so what happens is that they find out, and it kind of destroys uh, Miles's marriage. Um, and then he's basically going to parent this child alone. And but they need, of course, to tell Whitney that she has a child. And she decides that after finding out certain things, that she wants to be part of this child's life. So it's them having to co-parent this child.
Mhm.
And them having to come to terms with, he has to come to terms with who she is, her celebrity, the power that she has. Um, he's wealthy. She is by far wealthier.
Mhm.
And and so he didn't take well to this initially, this co-parenting thing, but eventually, this kind of, that this is the romance, so they end up falling in love and living happily ever after.
Yes, yes. So yes, that is really good. I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell what the book is about. But in just riding through that story, it's
Mm.
just there's so many ups and downs. So many things to think about. Because you've already stated that Miles is married and he and his wife. Can you imagine going to have a baby, and then they're both white, and this baby comes out like a mixed race child. Be like, wait a minute, and you didn't have a child; it was by the surrogate. So it's kind of like, wait a minute, what kind of mess is going on here?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of had to do the surrogacy thing, um, because I felt that if she actually carried the child, it would have been a different story.
It would have been.
And I needed that distance,
Mm-hmm.
right? I needed the distance. And so I had, I made it so that that it was a surrogate that carried the child who was just, she was in it for the money.
Right.
She did it, they paid her, and here's your baby, and she's off on her way. And so um that's kind of why I did it the way I did it, because I thought it was just cleaner. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, because it's a different thing if the person births the baby, because maybe you're right, they may have more of a maybe, but then maybe not. They may have more of an attachment if they've carried the child.
Probably not Holly, but someone else.
Yeah, because yes, Holly, Miles's wife, she's a piece of work, which you all have to read the book.
She's a piece of work.
She's a piece of work, so maybe not Holly, but
yeah, but somebody else, right? Exactly. So, yeah, and then of course there's the biracial part of it, right?
Yes.
There's this biracial baby, and I think that's the thing that concerns or scares Miles the most, because he's just who is he? He's
Right.
this white man who is going to have, he has a baby girl. Not only is it biracial, not only is she biracial, but it's a girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this thing about baby girls and their mothers, right?
Right.
And so she has all the advantages. She's got the money, she's got the wealth, she's got the influence, and she has the race. And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, kind of on her side in terms of, hey, I want, I want to be in this child's life. He really can't refuse her.
Right.
I mean, he can't, I think, and he's afraid to.
Oh yeah.
He's afraid to. And he is he's the president of the California Bar Association. So it's not like he's without power and influence, but he realizes her power and influence sort of trumps his.
Absolutely. As a celebrity, and a Rihanna-like celebrity who looks like Aaliyah. You talk about that in the book, which also goes in line with One in a Million. So there's a through line there. But but to beat the fact that she would have more money and all of that, more power, more influence. But then, as you said, as being a Black woman, she would understand things that her daughter, whose name is Haley, that her daughter would, need help with or assistance. I mean, even if it's something as simple as like what to do with the hair and things like that, that, the mother would have a better understanding of. But it's definitely, I know that there have been other books that may have like a surprise baby, but you definitely put a spin on what it means to have a surprise baby. Because you just probably the man with a surprise baby. Very rarely is it going to be a mother with a surprise baby.
Rarely does a mother get a call that says, hey, you got a kid and she's 6 months old. That doesn't happen very often. And I wanted that. Like, let me just tell you, here's my original premise for this story. The original premise was it was and you know what, I still might write it actually, maybe under a different name. But the original premise was it was going to be the heroine who is going to be carrying a child for her very, very good friend.
Okay.
Because of a cancer diagnosis that her friend had gone through cancer. And this isn't just a friend. She's like a sister, because her parents had taken her in when her mother died. And so she feels this deep obligation to her. And when she's going through chemotherapy, and when she's going through the cancer treatment, she's a teenager at the time. And she's crying over the fact that she probably will not be able to have a child. And she promised her at that time that she
Mm.
would carry. Now, 10, 15 years later, well, it comes up because her friend gets married and she's like, oh, would you do this? And she feels obligated. She
Mm.
loves her, but she feels obligated. And then, of course, what ends up happening is her friend dies.
Oh, okay.
The reemerges, and she is left with a child that she's carrying that she thought would have a mother, but no longer has a
Mm.
mother.
That would be a
Right?
good story too, though.
That
It
was
would
my
be.
original. That was my original premise for the book. And so when I found a way that I could kind of do the, sort of the surrogate thing, but in a different way, but you could still have two people who had to co-parent, who
Hmm.
didn't think they'd ever have to co-parent together, and they weren't on board. Especially the man was not on board with having to co-parent, because this isn't what he signed up for. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah.
Right. It
So
definitely, yeah. That would be a good story too. But as you said, I can say that for another one. But I mean, but just the fact of you wanting to tell a surrogacy story. Let's stay there for a minute.
hmm
What
hmm
is it that has drawn you to that topic to even want to talk about it in your work?
well, you know what it was. I'm one of those, like, I'm a big Dateline 2020 48 hours, like,
Okay.
huge true crime buff people. And this isn't true crime, but this is messed up. Do you remember the case with Kimberly? What's her name? She was switched at she was she was switched at birth.
Somebody in the comments, if you know, share. I've heard of a switch at birth stories. I want to say they made a Lifetime movie about it.
They did.
Probably did.
They
But if
did. Her name
anybody's
was
familiar, please share in the comments.
Kimberly. I can't remember. Anyway, I can't remember her last name. But anyway, the kids were switched at birth, right?
Hmm.
And one of the girls, um, when she ended up dying of a heart problem. She had a heart
Hmm.
disease. Um, and what was insinuated in all of that was that the parent of the child who was born, the biological parents of the child who was born with a heart defect, had them switch the child so she could have a
Mm.
healthy child.
Okay.
And so when the baby died, I mean, she wasn't a baby, I'm sorry, when the little girl died, because she had heart issues her whole life. I think she died when she was like 10 or something.
Hmm.
That's when they found out, for the blood, right, because of the blood matching and stuff, that she couldn't possibly be their child. So then they go back to the hospital and they find that their daughter is living with a single father,
Oh wow.
and the mother had died. The mother had also passed away, and that is their biological daughter. And there was this push and pull, and I started. Once I saw that, I started just thinking, okay,
We
even
got
if
it.
we,
Kimberly Mays. Kimberly
that's
Mays.
it.
Thank you, Patricia. My
and
sorority sister. Thank you, soror.
and I and I thought, what if not a switch at birth, but what if just a mix up? What if
Mhm.
you do a mix up? And then, of course, when I was writing, after I finished Token and I was writing Whitney's, I thought, you know, a conflict mix up like that would certainly be a biracial child. I mean, that would be an instant, immediate. You would kind of know if two white people
Mhm.
had a child that didn't look white, that clearly looked mixed, that not only would it be the big mix up and everything, but then there would be the conflict. So it was conflict
Right.
on top of conflict
It
about,
definitely is. It
what do
is.
you do? How do you handle this? Some people would, hey, not my kid, or not what I signed up for, put it up for adoption, or whatever the deal
Right.
is. So that would always sort of be an option, right? Find the
Mm-hmm.
biological mother, right? The black parent, and see if she wants her, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a thought that went through some people's heads in that book. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say which head, but it did. I think it went through some people's heads.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And because the thing of it is, it really depends on the individual as well. Because of course, Miles is going to have a connection because it is his biological child,
Daughter. Mm-hmm.
right? But sometimes, we know that there are people who,
Are you
purposely
kidding?
adopt black children and raise them, or biracial
Mm-hmm.
children and raise them. So for some people, it wouldn't matter. But of course, in this book, we had to have the conflict and all that to
Yeah.
be able to tell the story. But we
Mm-hmm.
know that, of course, it definitely could be a different outcome. But speaking of Whitney, Sahara is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
her
Yes, sir.
stage name. She it's like she's thrust into this situation that she's thinking, okay, maybe later on down the line, I'll meet the man of my dreams, and we'll go and get these eggs,
Mm-hmm.
fertilized, and hire a surrogate, or maybe have them implanted within me, or whatever the case may be. She has a whole idea of what's going to happen. And then, there's that conflict for her of like, wait a minute, I wasn't trying to have a baby right now. And who
Yeah,
is this
exactly.
dude who fathered? I mean, that's a thing there. And the fact that she has this, this great life, and she's at the peak of her career, and things are just continuing to grow for her, and in terms of, her status. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, that is a thing to think. It's one thing if you have a baby, or unexpected pregnancy, and you go ahead and you make the decision to carry the child and have the child. You have all this time to prepare for that. But for
Oh
her, there
yeah.
was none of that.
No, there was not only was there none of that, but it was this. She also couldn't. She doesn't see her life the way he sees her life,
Right.
right? He sees her life as this sort of, I don't want to say circus, because that's not it, but it's hectic. It's big.
Mm-hmm.
It's bigger than he can't see his daughter. He doesn't want his daughter to have to deal with a life like that.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to deal with a life like that. And he knows that if they have to co-parent this child, he's going to be somehow drawn into her life.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is with them not having any romance between
Right. I
them,
mean, that's just
right?
period as
That's
co-parent.
just period. Exactly. And especially at the beginning when people find out, what the situation is and stuff. So but she's been doing this for so long that sometimes I think it's hard for her to see what she brings to his life, and what she would bring to her. It's one thing, like one of the things that she didn't want was, she didn't want to be a single parent. She
Right.
wanted to have a partner, whether they were married or not, but she wanted to have a partner with her, with the person she had her children with.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, she would know them too.
Right. Yeah.
so, so, so this whole thing, like, oh my gosh. I mean, I wanted, she kind of had she had planned it. Like, if I can't have a child on my own because of the condition, then I have this backup plan, but I'm controlling that, right?
Right.
She gets to control those
That
things
part.
when she has a baby, and she's also, she's busy controlling her life,
Mm-hmm.
starting a business, going into acting after she's, done the singing, after she started singing. So she kind of has, a good firm grip on where, and this just upends her life so
Mm-hmm.
completely. Nothing she expected, and then she just has to deal, and she's trying to deal with it the best she can. I loved her. I loved her
Mm-hmm.
character, because I thought he was a grumpy. If we're talking about tropes, he's grumpy, and she's sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely you have to, he goes on you to warm
Mm-hmm.
up. because he's
Oh
so
yeah,
defensive.
at first.
Yeah, he's very defensive and he's very protective of this, of Haley. Like, at the beginning, I think he would want nothing better than for her to have walked away, sign those papers, and go. And
Right.
then he can get back to his life. But I think he also gets to understand why having her in his life is an important thing.
Absolutely.
Why, having Whitney, with Haley having Whitney is the best thing for her.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And I mean, yeah, he's crotchety and kind of mean, and you don't really like him at first. But then I also, it's not, put it this way, the way that he was behaving was understandable, because
yeah.
I can't imagine if I had a child that, this is my child that I've been
You
waiting for,
know?
I've
Mhm.
fallen in love with, blah blah blah. Now somebody else is coming in
A
that, and I
stranger.
don't have control. Yeah, a stranger,
Hmm. Hmm.
or a stranger personally, but all these things, or you've heard all these things, and you have this conception or misperception
Right. Yeah, exactly.
is, and then here they come, and now they're thrust into your life. I can understand why he was behaving the way he was behaving, even though I didn't necessarily like it. But I could understand it, because I know
Yeah.
how I would feel if this person who I think is out here living this wild life, this wild Hollywood, sex, drugs,
Mhm.
rock and roll type of life, in the
Exactly.
tabloids and all this, and
Uh-huh.
now all of a
Always being
sudden,
talked about. Yeah.
yeah,
She's not celibate. She's had relationships,
right,
and and the media is really interested in her, who she dates and whatnot.
right, right.
So he doesn't want that.
Yeah. So her as she is, and then also just the fact, you've already said he's gonna end up not with his wife, and
Mhm.
he hasn't had the best success in relationships in general. So he's probably, he's a little funny about women anyway, just because he's had these bad experiences.
Oh,
So
he
I
has.
mean,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
even though he's kind of standoffish or whatever it is that he's going through, it's kind of understandable, because now how many of us as women, if we've had a few bad experiences, and all of a sudden
Oh.
we're gun shy. So I do get it. I do get it.
Yeah. Yeah. He was definitely, and the divorce is pretty fresh for him, and
Right.
this and Haley is still very small,
Right.
and wanting to sort of step back and, like, I don't want to have anything to do with any women, um
Mhm.
eh, and then having to deal with this stranger who's like, hey, we're gonna set up some, you know visits for me, and I'm going to,
Mhm.
exercise my parental rights, and we're going to come to an agreement. And he's used to being controlled too. He's a lawyer,
Right. He's a
right?
lawyer.
Yeah, he's a lawyer, and he is the president of the California Bar Association. So, he's the top lawyer in
Mm-hmm.
California too. So, this is a new experience for him too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he doesn't like being. She didn't threaten him, but
Yeah, he's gonna take it that way.
yeah, exactly. He's gonna take it that way. I'm not signing those papers, so get
Right.
over it. We're gonna be co-parenting this child together.
Right. Well, that brings up a question though, because he is a lawyer, and of
Mhm.
course, in a situation like this, there are a lot of legalities that would play into it, just from the perspective of, okay, you've got this, fertility clinic that did something that they
Oh
shouldn't have
yes.
done,
Hmm.
and so you got to figure out what you're going to do with them, which we see that play out throughout the book. You got to read it to find out how. But you've got that. Then you've got all the legalities of parental rights, not having parental rights, child support, just all these things that would play off into that, which many would fall more under a family law type of situation.
Hmm.
So for you as the writer of this book, and there's some things with also with Whitney and her businesses and how she's going to expand her business and things like that. So there's legal things there. So in your writing process, did you have to do a lot of digging and research to kind of figure out
I had to.
that stuff?
And one of the reasons I chose California and I didn't was because at least they had some laws on the books when it came to surrogacy.
Okay.
Now, my particular issue was uncharted territory, and
Okay.
that's why they didn't end up with getting into it, because it was uncharted territory. So it was kind of like, okay, let's. They eventually come to an agreement, so they don't have to take this through court. So that certainly, but I had to, I had to go and look up the laws. What are the what are the laws in California when it comes to surrogacy? There's a lot of states, as I found out, that don't have any surrogacy laws. So you're out of luck if something goes wrong with a surrogacy situation. So I had to find ones that had surrogacy laws on the books. And then I had to see, do they have this specific one? And if they don't have it on the book, then I could kind of play with a little bit, in the sense that, like, I didn't want to get there. And that's why, when she's, she goes to her cousin, who's a family lawyer, and she's asking her, she's basically saying, hey, don't test this. Here's the best scenario. Get this done and do it legally. And that way we stay out of family court.
Right.
So they don't have to do one of these cases where, okay, this is sort of unprecedented, but here we go. We're going to rule on it. And then the other one was the IPO stuff that I had to, go look up. How does a company IPO? There's IPO lawyers. Of course there is. How much does it cost? That kind of stuff. So I had to, do the research on that to make sure that at least, I didn't go in depth too much.
No, you
but
didn't.
I had to get the basics to know what they need to do, how much does it cost, how long does it usually take, and what are the kind of background stuff do the lawyers or these do these IPO lawyers have to go through. So there's always, when I write a book, there's always something that I have to research. Like, there's always something that I have to look up and say, okay, what are the I had written a book about where I remember, what book was it? I wrote a new adult book, and I had to look up and find out what were all the statutory rape laws in all of the different states, and which one should I put it in, right? Which state did I need to put it in, and had to make sure, there's an age gap thing for statutory laws, like if it's within 2 years, and if it's more than 2 years, it's a misdemeanor, and if it's a felony, if it's within this year, and the girl is this old, or the person is that old.
Wow.
So there's always lots of research when it comes to my books. And then, of course, I write historicals. That's what I started writing.
Right.
There's a ton of research. I have research books in a box over there in the corner of my office, all filled with basically 19th century stuff on houses and comportment. They're British set, so comportment and the peerage and what they're called and how you address them and just everything.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring that up, because there's always going to be some fact checker out there when you write something, and so that's why I brought it up, because you do, as you talk about IPO, which, for those who don't know, initial public offering for a business, or if what would happen if there was a mistake at a clinic. Of course, you think of malpractice and things like that, and then all the custody and things like that. But it's like, to tell a story in a way that makes it believable, you do have to kind of know what you're talking about and not just make things up along the way. or if you are making things up, be clear that I'm making this up.
But because, when you're talking about fact checkers, they're, yeah, you will have people, and I don't ever want somebody to come back and say, well, no, that's wrong. Because I have read, and it usually happens in historicals, right? I'll read a
Mhm.
historical, they'll address the Duke in a manner that he's not addressed in that, oh, you don't call a Duke that. No, he's not a lord, he's his grace. Da, 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 da. And if you make that kind of mistake, that's the kind of mistake I don't want to make, right? I don't want readers coming up, she doesn't even know anything about, da da da, whatever. So I
Mhm.
always, I'm a researcher. I spend a lot of time, especially with my historical, a lot of time researching. It
Mhm.
can be quite, and the problem with researching too is when you find something that's interesting,
Mhm.
it is so hard not to put it all in the book, but you can't because
Mm.
it's just not interesting to a reader. They
Yeah,
don't
that's
care.
true.
You care because you think it's, oh my God, I didn't know this. Readers don't care. Just
Right.
just stick with the fact that you need to put out there and leave everything else alone.
Stick to the story. I get
Stick to
it.
the
I get
story.
it. One of the things, real quick, it made me think about that. There's a new soap opera out there. I don't know how many people are watching it. The new black soap opera, Behind the Gates. And on Behind the Gates, I don't know what the era is on CBS.
It's on CBS. Okay.
Right after Bold and the Beautiful. I have to tape it because I work during the day. but there was something that happened on one of the shows, and there is a Facebook group for it.
Mhm.
And somebody in the Facebook group said, "What she said today was wrong." People in the group were like, "It's TV, lady."
I mean, there's fiction. We call it fiction for a reason. There are certain things that you kind of have to keep, right? And that has to keep you grounded. Basically, like there's like gravity still exists in
Right,
our world, right? So if you're writing sci-fi or something else, you can
right.
do the world building, but the world we live in, there's certain facts you have to stick to. But other than that, like I always laugh when I hear people go, "Oh, she would never say anything like that." No, maybe you would never say anything like that. There's probably a lot of people who would say something like that, and this fictional character just
Right.
did.
Right, exactly, exactly. So I just that's what made me think about that, about making sure the facts are right. But of course, this is a romance, it's a contemporary romance.
Just
And,
mhm.
as Miles and Whitney are, becoming co parents, and,
Mhm.
they're both attractive. You can see that. Look at them. Nice looking
Well, she,
people,
yeah.
they're good looking people. So, of course, there's, the attraction that leads to romance along the way. That's not a secret.
Not,
We're not
that's
giving
not a
anything
secret, right?
away.
No, we're not giving anything away. Yes, they
But
have a romance.
it was interesting to see that play out as well, because in a lot of other stories, it's
Hmm.
just two people who meet each other, for whatever the meet cute reason is, that they come together, and then they just date, and what, like, will they, won't they, all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff that we typically see.
Right.
But this book has an extra layer because, of course, they are trying to raise a child and have to think about how what they're doing
It's
can
going to exactly because they're not your traditional couple. They came together in a completely weird, wild kind of way. And do you want to mess this up by getting involved? And then what happens when it all ends? If it ends, then how do we go back to it's like again being divorced parents. I think I was it was the idea I had in my head, like, well, we'll just move on. Yeah, right.
Right, yeah, yeah. Look at
So
that person you see naked with somebody else for the rest for, for the rest of your life because you share a child. Like, yeah,
exactly, and you have to watch them move on with their life, have other kids perhaps with
right,
someone else. Yeah, that was never going to work.
right, right. So,
So it was that because when I love conflict, right?
Yes.
I love conflict. And to me, conflict and tension is the thing that drives me in terms of what I like in books. That's the thing that keeps me reading. So
Mm.
with my books, I like to throw conflict and tension at them, which usually means, and some people are, some readers don't like this because, I mean, we've got everybody has a taste, right? And
Right.
if you don't like tension, if you don't like conflict, you're probably not going to like my books because I tend to pile it on in there. Because if you want a low angst, low conflict book, that's not me.
That's not Beverly.
That's not me. I'm going to throw the conflict and throw the tension, and which means that, they probably at some point don't get along very well. Or if they do get along, it's one of those, we can't go there. Like, or I don't
Mhm.
want to go there for some reason, whatever reason it is, right? And so I tend to, um, so you might get a surly hero or even a surly heroine. I
Mhm.
definitely wrote one, a historical with a heroine who was definitely, she was the grumpy
Mhm.
for sure.
How many
But
of us know grumpy people? I mean, we know the grumpies.
yeah, yeah, we know the grumpy. And but I always try to, with those grumpy people, I always try to, I don't ever want, I don't like to write caricatures of people. And so
Mm,
that those grumpy people tend to have issues that are relatable. And
mm,
that the reason that she acts like this, or the reason he acts like this, is because of. And
mm,
once you get past the guards and the chip or whatever it is, or the, which has to do with some emotion,
mm,
usually fear, abandonment issues, maybe a little bit. My dad didn't pay enough attention to me,
mm,
or always
mhm,
preferred this hero. Um, you get to discover that person, the
mhm,
sweet, wonderful, vulnerable side of who they are. And it
mm,
always eventually comes out. If it doesn't right away, it will eventually come out if you, um, because that's their journey. That's going to
mhm,
be their journey. That's their arc for the story. Um,
mhm. And
and
I love their relationship. That's Tony, one of my other sorors. Well, I have to shout us out. I'm wearing pink today, y'all. Don't be mad at me. I'm a Sigma Gamma Bro, Royal Blue and Gold, but the pink because it's kind of close to the book, so understand. But yes, my
yeah.
sorors, they love to come and thank you all for being here. But yeah, I agree. I did, like seeing their relationship and how it evolved, even with the angst and as we've already said, some of the reasons why you would understand his apprehension and even hers as well. Because I mean, she doesn't know this dude when she first stepped.
Right, but she doesn't know him, but what she does know is she has custody of that child. So
Right,
she feels like she's going in with a handicap, right?
right,
He's the one who he paid for the surrogate. In the eyes of the law right now, this child is his and his wife, so she has to sort of, she wants to be on the right side, and she wants to get on his good side.
right,
Hey,
right.
you
And we
know
see her doing things to kind of, oh well, he thinks I should do this, or this is going to allow me to be in his space more frequently, so he can get to know me. But we do see her doing these things,
exactly. Is she?
yeah, even
It,
as a quote unquote America's darling. People love her in that
yeah.
public sphere, but privately, she has to convince this man of who she is and what she's about.
And that she's good for Haley. That
Right.
regardless, she's going to be the best mother to this child, come hell or high water. And she has to convince him that he's doing the right thing by, first of all, keeping this all out of the courts and
Mhm.
setting up those, visits and letting her, get to know her daughter.
Mhm.
And I, that was, yeah, I've written a number of books that have babies in them.
Okay.
At least couple, three, maybe three or
Okay.
two. And
So what is it
so,
that you like about having babies in books?
well, one is the conflict element of it. This was definitely, like I said, I had that surrogacy book that I had all planned. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the one I did for a new adult, it was a new adult book called Trap. The Trap, right, was the prequel, and Trapped was the novel, and it was about two. They were basically teenagers. One was going off to college. One was in college. They were both in college, but he was at a college in New York. She was in a college in basically a community college because she couldn't
Mm-hmm.
afford to go to this school. And she got pregnant by
Mm-hmm.
accident. Oh my gosh. And the thing that the reason I wanted to write that one was because it was, what do you do when a child comes into your life completely unexpected? You're not prepared for it. He's not prepared for it. And and can your relationship survive it when there is resentment?
Mm-hmm.
There is some serious resentment, um, because this upends both their lives, right? He was supposed to go off to college, he was doing football, and be an architect or whatever. If he didn't make football, he was going to be an architect, whatever the deal is. And a baby changes all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you then blame the other person,
Mm.
right? So there's real resentment. And that's why it's called The Trap and Trapped.
Okay. 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 Yes.
So I just find that fascinating, and I think one of the things that do impact a relationship is a child. It's
Absolutely.
probably the biggest thing that does impact a relationship. And I always say my tagline for that was, um, basically, how do you test the strength of a relationship?
Mm.
Basically, and it's wonderful when everything's good,
Right.
but that her pregnancy tested their relationship to the nth degree.
And you know what? And that is real because I mean, how many people find themselves in that situation? So,
And
you
and,
know,
and that's what I wrote, because I know many people who have found themselves in that situation, teenagers, pregnant,
mm,
and not everybody's happy.
right, right. So everyone, I have a few more questions for Beverly about some of her other works, but make sure you all get One in a Million. It's a part of the Token series. Read Token if you haven't read that one yet. This is number 2. Before we move on, will there be others? Oh yes, thank you for showing that one. As are there? Well, you did say there's an Aurora story, but we don't know when just yet because that
Yeah,
one came out
that's
in 23, correct? Token came out in
yeah,
23.
2023. And
Okay, so
also we which is still ongoing, but we sold the film rights for this, for Token.
yes,
So that's fine. It's still ongoing. We have a showrunner.
okay.
We're
So you're
we're
making progress then.
so we're gonna be hopefully some good news will come this year
Okay. So
regarding.
in case you all missed that, there are film rights for Tokens, so we can be on the lookout for that. And just as you see at the bottom, you can follow Beverly on her socials so that you can, and her website, so you can get updates on when that's going to be available. Because that'd be great, to
Mm.
see your story make it to film. And more people get access because a lot of times once the movie comes out or the TV series or whatever,
Mhm.
then it makes people want to go back and read the books even if they
Oh,
haven't already. Or
yeah,
you'll get a re-release that's a tie-in to the show
yeah,
or the movie or whatever. So yeah, that's
yeah.
definitely good. So
That'd
congrats.
be like that would be the like best case scenario ever.
Sound clapping. Yay! Yay, yay, yay. So
Oh,
we talked about this a little bit before we came
mhm,
online, but I want to talk about it because
mhm.
Beverly, for those of you who don't know, has a whole lot of other books, and like she's already mentioned, like historical fiction, new adult, several different series that she's written, books that have
Mm-hmm.
been translated into German, French, other languages, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But a lot of your other books don't necessarily center Black characters. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask about that
Mm-hmm.
because we don't oftentimes see Black writers that are writing books that don't have, Black protagonists as the
Mm-hmm.
featured characters.
Right,
So
it's
just
teacher
tell us a
character.
little
Mm-hmm.
bit about, just about what that's been like for you. I know you started out, as I was reading in your background, you knew that you wanted to be a romance writer,
Mm-hmm.
forever. But what was it that kind of led you down that path initially?
Well, so my mother, okay, so I grew up in Canada, right? So I grew up in Barrie, Ontario, which is like 60 miles north of Toronto. And so where I grew up, obviously, I mean, we were usually the only Black either family or person in my class, right? I think there
Mhm.
was two Black families in my school, like, and this was from kindergarten to grade 8, right? And then kind of the same in high school. Um, and I was a big reader from Jump Street. I mean, I read everything. Dr. Seuss, you name it, Hardy Boys, blah, 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 all the way up. And when I
Right.
started reading romance, I remember my mother actually read Harlequin,
hmm
Harlequin romances.
hmm
And then I remember my sister was reading, and at this point, I think I was into first chance love kind of thing. It was about teenagers, right? I'd moved
Right.
on from the Bobbsey twins and Nancy Drew and all that other stuff. Um, and I was big into also Agatha Christie. And my sister handed me this book called No Gentle Possession. I will always remember it. And Mather handed it to me and was like, oh, look at this. Look at this.
Your screen flipped. I'm looking at a guy. Something happened. There you go. I
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
was like, who's
So,
that
so, so what was I saying? Oh, and I read just the clip that she was so thinged. I read the clip and then I ended up reading the rest of the book and then taking that book and reading it from beginning to end again, right? Because I only read it
man?
like halfway through. And then so that got me started on Harlequin romances,
Okay.
right? And
Mm.
then my mother started working for Harlequin. The
Mm.
best job ever. And so when my mother got a job there, we used to get a box of every single book in every series every single month.
Wow.
And that started my path down the Harlequin. And I was going to write for Harlequin. That was my goal. Like, I'm going to
Mhm.
write for Harlequin romance. And then I always kept that dream alive. And then what ended up happening was we moved to the United States and I was going to college. I was trying to write and um but then life got in the way. So
Mhm.
then I had my son, I got divorced, and I'm in my 30s at this point, right? And I'm like,
Mm.
oh my God, what am I going to do? I started reading again, and I said, I wanted to be a writer. I'm going to do that. So I
Mm.
joined RWA, which is the Romance Writers Association. And that year, there was a contest. Um, and it was Avon Family. Avon was hosting this thing. So I decided, you know what? I love historicals. I had started reading historicals, Avon
Mhm.
historicals, and I said, you know what? Let me just try.
Yeah.
I don't think I can write a historical because I don't think I have a historical voice, but I'm going to try anyway. So I entered this. I didn't win the contest, but I went through all the exercises,
Mhm.
writing all the 6 chapters that we had to write. And after I finished it, I said, you know what? I'm going to join Nano, which is this I don't know if you know what Nano is. It's a
Mhm.
national. It was for November. You
Right.
write 50,000 words. So I
Right.
decided I would do that, but I would try my hand at a historical.
Hmm.
And the historical that I started writing was this historical that I ended up publishing,
Wow.
selling. It was the first book I've ever written, first book I've ever finished, and
Okay.
ended up selling it to Kensington for a 2-book deal. And when I was writing, when I started writing historical, I know there's Beverly Jenkins is out there. I don't think I'd even heard of her at that point,
Right.
but the historicals I had always read were British set. They had dukes and earls and da 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 da, and I did, that was what I knew,
Okay.
and that's what I wrote, right? Um, and so once I started that series, and then I sort of finished that series, um, the last book, which I couldn't sell to a publisher, um, I decided to self-publish
Okay.
because I really wanted this book to,
Be out in the world.
and exactly. And so then as a Black person, of course, there are Black characters in those books also.
Right.
Um, and I was, I'm always thinking, okay, the market, what's the market like? What can I sell? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what can I sell that's going to be marketable?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking to myself, you know what I'm going to do? Okay, so I'm good. The character, the Black characters that I put in the book, they're going to get their own books,
Mm.
right? They're going to get their own books. And I don't want to give anything away from my historical, but there's this things that happen, and I don't want to give it away because it's kind of a surprise. But
Okay.
um,
Well, they're going to get their own books. That's what we need to know.
um, and then I started like, okay, how, what am I going to be able to sell?
Mm.
What am I going to be able to sell and sell well enough to basically quit my job?
Right.
And
Because
that
you were
that
working in IT and you're not anymore.
no, I am. I
Oh, you
am.
are still? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, no. Like, I did take for 10 years, I was writing full time. And I
Gotcha. Gotcha.
recently went back. When I got back, when I moved back to the United States from Canada, I I I got a full-time job. So now I'm only
Gotcha.
writing part-time.
Gotcha.
Um and so so my goal was always, okay, you get a diverse cast. Everybody gets a book. And you can sell that, right?
Yes.
Because the books that some of the books that I've tried to sell just, and I know why they didn't sell, or I know why they were turned out.
Gotcha.
And it's this romance, um, or at least romance in this, or at least I'm finding that romance as a in the publishing business is very, um, it's a hard, and it's I don't know very many people, especially Black authors, who can make a living doing it,
Okay.
um and certainly not for ever, like
Forever.
till they retire. That was always my goal, but it's just, these, you put out some books, you see how they work, you see what works or what doesn't work, and then you're like, okay, what do I do? Okay, they didn't want this book, and I kind of know why they didn't want this book, and I know I didn't. But guess what? I sold this book, and I know why they sold. And
Mhm.
so it becomes. You have to decide. I think everybody has to decide what what'll work. What'll
Right.
work.
Right. Right.
What's going to give them the financial payback that they want, or and what won't, and how do you change it so
Mm-hmm.
that you can get the audience that you want, that they buy enough of it that you can continue to write it.
Right. You can
And
do what you
it's
want to do, then like
mhm.
live the life that you want and write the stories that you want to tell.
Right. Because if they don't sell, if they don't sell.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, that's really, yes, those of us who love to read
Mm-hmm.
and, go, whether it's going to the library, buying the books, which, of course, the libraries have to buy the books,
Yeah,
or
right.
we're buying them ourselves. It has to be something that, unless you're publishing it for yourself, a company has to buy into it and believe that people are going to want it. They're not in it just because you have this passion project and you want to get it out there. They want to feel like, okay, but don't make money, it don't make sense, as the saying goes. So that
Mm-hmm.
does make it makes a lot of sense to me. But as I said to you before we came on,
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that you have written some things that maybe people wouldn't think that you would write, because there are always others trying to tell our stories. So it's nice to
Mm-hmm.
see somebody who's telling stories, other people's stories, and putting your spin on it, like you said, including the Black characters who will get their own, books and things like that. So I could appreciate that, but I just wanted, you to talk about that, because some people may or may not know that that's something that you have done, or if they go looking, for your history, they'll be like, wait a minute,
Right.
this is
Oh,
this,
believe me,
this is something
like
totally
I,
different.
I remember my cousin, when my first book was coming out, she texted me and said, "What is going on here?" And she grew up here in the United States, and it was quite funny. It was quite an interesting conversation. But yeah, I mean, there's so many decisions that you have to make when you sit down with pen and paper and decide. A lot of people are like, oh, just write for passion, and oh, basically you shouldn't need to be make money off of your stuff. It just this is your passion. So you know for some reason you shouldn't think about that aspect of it. And I'm sorry, authors, especially authors who um, are doing this and signing contracts, and that we think about that a lot. We
Right.
think about it a lot because
Yeah,
it
and it makes
matters.
sense. It makes good sense. So thank you for sharing that. I know it's outside of the book that we came on to talk about, but
Yeah.
I think that that's important, to know a little bit more about you and your journey. And then also for others out there who may want to write and may not necessarily want to write, they want to write what they want to write, put it that way. Tell the story
Hmm.
they want to tell. And
Well,
they don't
yeah.
always have to look the same just because you may be in brown skin doesn't mean you always have to tell stories of brown people. yeah. So
Yeah, and you will have a lot of people that basically want you to only write, you know, um, but I can't be, I have to think about so many other things when I sit down and I write and I make a story. And so, I just, this route, the route that I have taken, I don't think um the success that I've had, where I was able to sort of not write full time for 10 years, could not have happened, I don't think, any other way.
right, right. And your story is your story. Your journey is your journey, and I applaud you for it, Beverly. Miss
Thank
Beverly.
Oh, believe me,
No,
I have heard that. Miss Beverly, oh my God.
you're
I'm
probably
in the
younger than
South.
me, so I'm
Okay.
saying that. I'm
You
just saying that to be sweet.
when you move to the South, because when I moved to the South, I had been living in the North for the longest while. You hear that, Miss whoever.
Yeah, Miss Beverly. Yes, and yeah, you are here in my neck of the woods in the Atlanta
Yes.
metro. So I love it. I love it. So again, everybody, One in a Million is what we were here to talk about. This is Beverly's latest book. It actually came, it's not even a month old. In a few days, it'll be a month old.
Yeah, in a few days.
March 15th. So yes, please pick up a copy of One in a Million. Pick up a copy of Token. Be on the lookout for Token on screen. I don't know if they're going to change the name of it or not when it goes on screen. But whether it's Token as it is or an adaptation of it, be on the lookout for that, because I believe that's a big part of it, as well as we dive into your stories in all of their forms. It is a thing because it's ultimately about money and being able to, financing and, being able to make money for the companies who do these things.
Yeah,
More that we enjoy these stories, read these stories, allow the stories to resonate with us and share them, then it's better for Beverly to be able to continue to tell more of these types of stories. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you grab some water or whatever the case may be. Don't hang up just yet.
Okay.
But I'm just going to announce who's going to be here the next couple of weeks because we got a lot of romance on the next couple of Mondays. So I'm going to share that with everybody here. And I will see you in just a second. Thank you again for being here, Beverly. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Marcy, for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right. So let me tell you all who is coming on the next 2 Mondays. We got stuff going on Wednesdays as well, but I just want to share the next 2 Mondays with you so you can see which romance writers are going to be with us. So a week from today, which will be the 21st, we will have Etta Easton with The Love Simulation. So be here for that. The book prior to this was The Kiss Countdown. This is like a secondary story as well. I think a lot of authors are getting like series that are coming out. So Etta Easton will be here next Monday with The Love Simulation. And then in 2 weeks, which will be the 28th, I'm trying to count in my head what the date is. On the 28th, we will have Tati Richardson. I know Tati is spicy, y'all. So if you like spicy, this is it, Losing Sight. So she will be here on the 28th to talk about Losing Sight. So that's what we've got coming up, and some other great things, or some other great authors in between, which I will be announcing. Well, one of which has already been announced this coming Wednesday. We will have Victoria Christopher Murray with Harlem Rhapsody. And next week we have a very, very special guest, and I'm not going to tell you next right now, but just to give you a hint, she has written 150 romance novels. So y'all can guess who that is, and she will be here next week on Wednesday. So we're doing great things. And I don't think I've mentioned, if you're watching this in real time, it's April the 14th. But on the 27th of this month, the BGC Book Club will be 5 years old. So y'all, I've been doing this for 5 years, interviewing nothing but Black women writers and sharing stories that are by, for, and about us. Now, there have been a couple of men in the room, and you may start to see some a little more frequently, just depending on what they're writing about. But this space definitely centers Black women writers. And I am so thrilled that you all have given me the opportunity to do this for you for the last 5 years. And I look forward to the next 5 plus more. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to seeing you again this month. And as we continue on, and in the meantime, in between time, please take good care of yourselves. Grab a copy of 1 in a Million, and we'll see you again real soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.